A Matt Walsh visit to campus brings vandalism in its wake. A nun at a Catholic school supports a pro-choice club, and the Supreme Court weighs affirmative action. I'm Wyatt Eichholz, and this is Campus Countdown. Let's start with story number 3. The Supreme Court to hear oral arguments in the cases regarding affirmative action. Oral arguments began in the Supreme Court this week for 2 cases challenging race-based university admissions, otherwise known as affirmative action policies. These cases, filed against Harvard University and the University of North Carolina by the Students for Fair Admissions, allege that the schools used affirmative action policies to discriminate against the plaintiffs' applicants and on the basis of race and ethnicity. Edward Bloom, the lobbyist leading the challenge, told Campus Reform that banning affirmative action would lead to the restoration of a colorblind admission system for U.S. universities. According to a poll from earlier this month, a majority of Americans disapprove of affirmative action. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson is expected to recuse herself from the Harvard case, given that she served on the school's board of overseers. For our second story this week, let's go to Campus Reform correspondent Melissa DeGama.
Campus Reform recently reported how a Catholic college, Vanderbilt University, limited pro-life groups while praising pro-abortion groups. Administrator Sister Laura Nettles admitted to, quote, significantly curtailing, end quote, pro-life activities on campus. Following this, VU President Rick Tritley assured that Sister Nettle values all human life and has the university's full support. Tritley guaranteed that the audio was misunderstood and, quote, doesn't reflect the context of the presentation, end quote. Nonetheless, the sister's words are in blatant contradiction to Catholic doctrine. The Catechism of the Catholic Church condemns abortion as, quote, gravely contrary to the moral law, end quote. Pope Francis reaffirmed that every human being is called by God to enjoy the fullness of life. Despite the university's support for Sister Nettles, her pro-life stance is in question. In Mission Convocation, the nun explained how she would love to open a pro-abortion group so long as it was disguised under a different name, like Health Club or Reproductive Rights Club. Such a suggestion tarnishes Catholic values and distorts the gruesome reality that is abortion. She boasted about how, quote, pro-life groups have to jump through a lot of hoops to be able to do what they do, end quote. Hawks for Life members, like other pro-life groups at various universities, are being harassed and restricted following the overturn of Roe v. Wade.
Thanks, Melissa. Now for story number 1. University of Wisconsin vandalized and a student assaulted surrounding the Matt Walsh lecture. Last week, the Daily Wire's Matt Walsh visited the University of Wisconsin-Madison as part of his What is a Woman tour in partnership with the Young America's Foundation. In the lead-up to the event, leftist students and faculty fiercely opposed the event, with the YDSA chapter labeling Walsh a transphobic fascist and circulating a petition to cancel the speech, claiming that Walsh's presence actively endangers trans students. One teaching assistant even described in the student newspaper why she removed over 40 posters for the event. YAF has called for an investigation into the teaching assistant's actions. The night before Walsh's appearance, vandals painted profanity-laced slogans on several buildings on the UW campus, including a statue of the school mascot. Now, protesters gathered outside of this campus in the hours before Walsh's speech. The university stated that there were several tense instances of pushing and shoving, but one Campus Reform correspondent documented being assaulted as protesters knocked his camera out of his hands. Now, Walsh was able to proceed with his speech, but not without disruption. He said on his show that protesters pulled the fire alarm several times while he was giving his lecture. That wraps up this week's top 3 stories, but we now turn to the woke tweet of the week. Jacob S. Rowe, an associate professor of sociology at Brigham Young University in Provo, Utah, recently published a link to an anti-white column in the Washington Post, along with the following quote: "It's no accident that Republicans are winning the majority of white voters. Result of a successful strategy. It's not that Trumpism brought white voters as a bloc to the Republican Party, but rather that it hasn't scared many of them off. Rowe followed this quote with an emoji, suggesting that the author of the column, Perry Bacon Jr., was right on the target. In the article, Bacon claimed that America has a white voter problem, and that there is, quote, no sign that it's going to go away anytime soon, unquote. He also argued that white people are the majority of voters in America, and because of this, quote, America is in trouble, unquote. In August 2020, Rowe wrote an open letter to Brigham Young University Committee on Race, Equity, and Belonging, in which he stated that his goal is to amplify the voices of Black BYU students and called on the committee to make institutional reforms to help Black BYU students. Woke academia has reached the point where professors can make open references to the, quote, white voter problem, unquote, all in the name of equality and anti-racism. Well, that's all for this week's edition of Campus Countdown. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel to stay up to date on more leftist bias on campus. Also, be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Campus Reform. I'm Wyatt Eichholz. Thank you so much for watching, and be sure to check in next week to Campus Countdown.